Welcome everybody to CivicTechYYC. We're at December 10th of 2024. Tonight we have human-centric AI empowering engagement and learning. We're hosting Lance Douglas, who's the CEO and CTO of IAXOV, which is an AI startup redefining how governments, not-for-profits, innovation ecosystems, and large enterprises leverage AI to create meaningful change. And a land acknowledgement before we get started. CivicTechYYC as an organization resides on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot First Nation tribes of the Tsimshian, the Piikani, the Kainai, and the Stoney and Nakota First Nations tribes, as well as the Chiniki, Bearspaw, Wesley, and Tsuut'ina First Nation. This is also homeland to the historic Northwest Métis and the Métis Nations of Alberta. Civic Tech Movement, just to go over here, is a use of technology for public good. So we use data and design to address challenges that citizens and governments are facing, help citizens and governments work together to use technology, data, and design, pursue opportunities for greater citizen engagement and more effective services, and grow public engagement and to enhance digital services in ways that are more inclusive, responsive, innovative, open, and citizen-centered. Civic Tech Movement is a global movement, and it's grown over the last 20 years with the help for organizations like Code for All. In U.S. cities like Chicago, Boston, New York City have led the Civic Tech Movement with the help of important national organizations such as Code for America, the U.S. Digital Service, and 18F. There are civic tech organizations in many cities and towns across Canada, which are all listed on the Code for Canada website, as well as government agencies like the Canadian Digital Service. We've got Civic Tech Toronto, there's Ottawa Civic Tech there, as well as Beta YEG, which is the Civic Tech equivalent up in Edmonton. Civic Tech Calgary was launched in 2017 by bringing together people who had an interest in improving the community through technology, leveraging the support of the City of Calgary and the Rainforest Alberta Network. Driving force was to break down sector silos and create space for collaboration, addressing challenges and opportunities of citizens and government. And the civic tech community sits in between citizens and communities, the city and its digital strategy and civic innovation, entrepreneurs and startups and education, as well as the technology industry as a whole with alliances, regional partnerships, and smart cities. Some of our major projects have included the BudLib Database Management Project, which is a project to use small computers like Raspberry Pis in schools for their library databases so that they don't need to use large, costly Windows machines to be able to track their library books. We've done blockchain experiments, which is learning and testing with blockchain. So it's not crypto, just using blockchain for other sorts of applications. And one of the nice applications that we got started here is Volley that Alice Lamb started, which is a volunteering app if anyone wants to look for volunteer opportunities within the city. We also work with civic user testing groups. These are grassroots groups that facilitate better and more inclusive and accessible usability testing that engages residents in the creation of technology that's meant to serve them. We helped to start Inclusity Calgary here in Calgary, which is a team of technologists, designers, public employees, community organizers, entrepreneurs, policy analysts, and other engaged citizens, all with a shared vision that Calgary can be a more accessible city for all. We design and run testing sessions with an inclusive and representative group of Calgarians to improve the usability of products, processes, and services for teams in the public, private, and not-for-profit sector. We're proudly supported by the Calgary Foundation, and the organization was started in partnership with another meetup group here in Calgary called Calgary UX. And there's also a whole bunch of other partner groups and organizations that we're a part of that are a part of the now Megatech meetup group. So we've got Code for Canada, which is our partner organization across the country, Calgary UX that we started Inclusity with there. We also work with Data for Good, Rainforest Alberta, the YYC Data Society, Platform Calgary, Immigrant Techies Alberta, the Test Tribe, as well as OSGeo, which is the Open Source Geoscopal Foundations meetup. And if you want to follow us on our socials, we've got our Meetup page where you can follow us and then get updates through the Meetup app, post on our website any major updates. We now have Blue Sky, so we're starting to post on there, seeing a lot of people moving over. Still have X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and Threads, as well as LinkedIn and Facebook. So with that, I'm going to bring my share down and then introduce Lance here. And Lance, do you want to get started?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that. Thought I had my share button closer. Cool. I'm gonna turn off my video while I'm sharing just because I'm looking at a different screen. Looks
Okay.
odd. Yeah, so hey, Lance Douglas here. I'm well, use my video as I'm talking to you. My name's Lance Douglas. I'm the CEO, CTO of IAXOV, which is Vox AI in reverse. Um, it's a fun name to try and pronounce when you just look at it. But as Ross had mentioned, what we're trying to do is revolutionize engagement. And one of the most challenging things for human to human engagement is the communication, right? So how do we understand people well at scale, right? It's easy enough to get a great interviewer that is ready to interview somebody that they have the greatest potential to get the most amount of information out of them, whether it's for a survey or for a job interview or for any other aspect. But when you start to do that at scale and multiple people and you bring in different languages, cultures, disabilities or challenges, sight and physical disabilities, you start to break down the barriers, or you start to build up, but you start to break down the communication channels that are available to people. And so what IOXIV was started as is an AI platform for bringing speech and sight interfaces into government, larger enterprise, NGOs and such, so that they can get new levels of engagement, right? Like second and third order effects. And what do I mean by that? I'll just really quickly give you this preamble, and then I'll jump through the slides and kind of talk about a use case of this technology. Um, so what do I mean by the second and third order effects? Everyone is using some sort of form of generative AI at the moment, right? And we've all been using AI for the longest time on our phones and our Gmail and otherwise. But really, the availability of generative AI to create the finesse of language for us on our behalf is really exploding, as we all know. I mean, it's commonplace now. But the one big challenge with that is, what does that mean from a security and privacy layer? And what are people trying to do with that? And so mostly what people are trying to do with it is automate something. Oh, well, I did this before. I'm just going to tell AI, do that for me now. And that's kind of a first order effect. Or, if you look at, say, Clayton Christensen from Harvard, his idea of disruptive innovation, that would be an incremental innovation, maybe even a sustaining innovation, where we went from answer machines to automated answer machines to digital answer machines to now we can see it automatically go to text, right? Those are all little incremental one order effects. And so what we looked at, we said, well, there's all this opportunity for generative AI to have a finesse with language in both understanding what we're trying to say, as well as presenting back to us what we've asked for, whether it's in code or language, um, a very better than the mean version of what we're asking for. And so there's a leap that becomes available there to say, well, what is now possible if computers can understand what we're trying to say, whether it's with words or with what we're showing them? And that's what IOXIV does. And I'll add one layer more to that is when we went to market with this earlier this year, with the speech and sight interfaces and some sample applications on these second and third order effects, which I'll show you in a sec. The market started pushing back, saying, "Hey, it's great what everyone's trying to do with AI, but security, privacy, and legal departments are terrified of everything everyone's trying to do with AI." And so, underneath everything that IOXIV is it has built itself to be a security and privacy layer that you can plug in data processes and systems and make sure that it's 42001 ISO 42001 compliant, SOC 2 compliant, ISO 27001 compliant, so that any organization that adopts it can start to build applications on top of that. So I'm going to really quickly just jump through these slides, and then I'm gonna play you a presentation just because it's perfect. We don't have to worry about any glitches with my internet, and I'm speaking obviously a lot slower in it. But I'm gonna walk through these slides, and then I'm gonna jump over to a recording of a presentation of a use case that we're gonna talk about. Hopefully that was clear. So I think I've explained this first slide. I'm just going to move on. The idea is, like I'd mentioned, it's all about core principles, right? So everything that we actually sell a customer is a platform for integrating AI into their environments while maintaining privacy and security in between systems. So one example, at the WaveTech Center currently today, there's a VR environment. We've talked with Chase, who heads up the VR team, and he said, it'd be really great if I could talk to the VR system because it's clunky and difficult to have to go over to the keyboard while trying to interact with the 3D room. And so we talked with the manufacturer, Igloo, of that platform, and they said, hey, that's great, but we don't want to expose our APIs just willy-nilly. Like, what's the security platform that this is going to be protected within? And so once we explained our environment, that they would connect into our system, and our system would expose their APIs through our sight and speech interfaces, not directly at the API, so that other systems that might be inside the city of Calgary also don't have access directly to their APIs, then they were happy, right? So you can automatically start to see the use case there. If you can have an environment where everyone feels comfortable putting their data in, and then AI is a natural language or speech-based interface on top of it, they start to feel comfortable about what's possible. So we have two applications, as I'd mentioned, reference applications, we call them. One of them is Unifies, and that is about strategy design. So how do we understand what the perspective is in government? And how do we understand whether that's from stakeholders, whether that's internal staff and peers, or whether that's the public generally? How do we really deeply understand that? And so my experience in surveys is I've done thousands of surveys for the Alberta government, Ontario federal government, plenty of prime ministers during their campaigns and such like that, all using voice, natural language processing, all the way back to the early 2000s. And one of the things that I realized about the way that almost all surveys are done is someone sits in the back room and uh, they come up with quantitative or qualitative ranges of what they're expecting people to say, and then they hope that they're able to get that data out of um, the participants and turn that into quantitative data. I'm getting a little bit into what's in the recorded session here, so I'm going to skip a little past that and let you see that in a second. But what we've realized is that if we can have a really good conversation using generative AI that is tuned to understand how to dig into a conversation so that no matter who they're talking with, no matter what language they're talking in, we're able to get to the meat of what their perspective is on a specific topic and then quantify and qualify that. We're able to actually do engagement at a second order effect that was never possible before. Truly understand the perspective of a populace at scale, the equivalent of a perfect focus group, but at the cost of less than a web survey. And so the case study I'm going to walk you through real quick is this is a no cost demonstration we did in the WaveTech Center during their launch. We worked with the team there to understand what would they want to know about people that were visiting the WaveTech Center. And so we asked them three simple questions. What do you think of the WaveTech Center? What do you think of innovation in the city? And why do you think the WaveTech Center is important for innovation in the city? And what we did is we were able to dive deep into that conversation really, really quickly to pull out what people's perspective was of the current state and the future state, and then generate an analysis dashboard, which we'll show you as well. Um, I'm just going to jump right through this real quick. One of the analysis that we're going to show in the dashboard is the metrics for everything that we've seen that people were communicating, SWOT analysis of the current versus future state based on those metrics, and then strategic recommendations that could be made if we understand the metrics, how they need to move, and the SWOT analysis that would be generated. And really what this does is this second, and I would say the third order effect, is the cities can get to the right language to communicate change and behavioral improvements in their own efficiencies, effectiveness, as well as their populace. So I'm going to jump over and I'm going to start this presentation. This is a demonstration of how a government can use our advanced survey platform to capture more in-depth details from their citizens. This is an example of the City of Calgary's website where we've demonstrated our tool. You can see that we've simply injected a button on the website that brings up a configurable widget that citizens can engage with. So this gives a lot of details to the user so they can understand what the city is doing and why. But this could be for suggestions, complaints, praise and recognition, maybe a real-time engagement, which is what we'll actually demonstrate, something that's happening at the moment that they want to get feedback from citizens and stakeholders. Could be also internal stakeholders only if you wanted to, or community insights, things that you might not actually even know to ask for or ask about. So as an example, in this demo, you can provide just a general feedback to the city or specific hot topics that the city knows are specific areas that they would like feedback on at that moment. This can be completely configurable in real time by adding or removing these in the backend interface by the city. We'll use an example here of a live event that was just happening, and it was the Wave Tech Center launch. So it was an innovation environment that the municipal government had launched, and our technology is employed there to listen to stakeholders in the community as well as within the city on how important innovation is to the city. I'll walk you through as an example, but all of this is configurable, including how it looks and the languages used and supported. Okay, so this is what the kiosk looks like that's installed at the Wave Tech Center currently. And a person would go into there's a little booth set up the person can go into, and they would start the interview. We'll go through that now.
Welcome to Calgary's Wave Tech Center attendee survey. Our personalized AI agent, Jeff, will join and kick off the session in a moment.
Welcome. Bienvenue. Bienvenido. Maligayang pagdating. Swagak hey. Thank you for participating in this interview today. My name is Jeff Landstrom, and I'm here to explore your insights about the future of innovation in Calgary, particularly focusing on the newly launched Wave Tech Center. Our conversation is completely anonymous, but you can share your name with me to make this interaction more personal. I understand several languages, so if you wish to conduct this interview in a language other than English, please let me know. For now, I'll start with the first question. Why do you think innovation is important to Calgary's future?
I think it's very important because any government that's responsible for the general well-being of their citizens from an equal opportunity perspective really needs to be constantly evolving to be part of that future.
Just a moment, please, while I prepare my next response. This will take a few seconds. Thank you for sharing that insightful perspective. It seems you believe that maintaining relevance and preparing for change are key drivers for innovation in Calgary's future. Now, let's drill down into your thoughts on the newly launched New Wave Tech Center. What do you think of the New Wave Tech Center, especially in relation to how it might support innovation for Calgary?
Yeah, sure. I think the Wave Tech Center is a really prudent use of public funds. Okay, so very personable interview. However, the real value is in the way we're able to extract the data. So the problem with standard surveys is that we quite often capture free form or qualitative data from people. So we'll ask them a question such as, how do you feel about this situation? Very satisfied to very unsatisfied. Those types of questions. Those qualitative questions are then aggregated by someone and turned into quantitative values, suggesting that if many people or most people have these qualitative feelings, that we can make a strategic decision off of them. And the reason that's difficult for government is because we don't know the nuances of why people made the statements or perceptions that they did. So this dashboard is something that's typically not available directly from a standard type of survey. You would need a focus group, which is typically $150 to $300 per interview, to be able to generate this data, where ours can make it for pennies on the dollar. And so what are you seeing here? This is a dashboard that shows the current Wave Tech Center's priorities. The top 3 reasons that this division has a budget and a mandate. What you'll notice is we didn't ask any questions about integration of emerging technologies or safe experimentation and rapid prototyping or collaborative partnerships and capacity planning. However, with the questions we did ask, we're able to analyze those answers and pull out the way that people talk about the Wave Tech Center and about innovation, if their language that they use and the perceptions that they have, whether they align with what the Wave Tech Center's priorities are. What this helps you understand, imagine that this was the public responding and we were understanding thousands or tens of thousands of citizens and their alignment with particular government programs. And the language that they're using can be defined through blind spots. So we know we might be doing the right thing as the government, but we're not communicating it using the correct words because the populace isn't hearing it that way. Give you an example. These are small samples that we pulled just so we don't divulge any privacy. But this, at the largest sample size of the data we have from 140 surveys, is lower than the other 2. People don't think about safe experimentation and rapid prototyping when they're thinking about the amazingness of innovation. However, this is one of the most important aspects for any government's innovation. So what could they do? Very easily, they could put up marketing posters as you walk into the Wave Tech Center or onto city property or on a commercial or on their website that says, welcome to a safe experimentation rapid prototyping space. Or our city, the best place for government and private industry and academia to come together for safe experimentation and rapid prototyping. What does that do? It starts to set the language that you want the populace to realize that you are focused on. Or if it's a blind spot, maybe it's something that you're actually doing, but the language that the public is expecting it in is not the language that you communicated in. So it seems like you're not being heard or the citizens are not being heard. And so this is data that is typically never available from survey data. All of the other responses to the questions are available in standard form where you can go and say, what was the answer for every one of those questions? This is the data that's available on top of that. Let me show you one aspect that's actually even deeper. This is the data that we're able to generate that is not possible at scale in any other solution today. These are over 300 different data points or metrics that were captured from the surveys performed. What were people talking about? What was their perception of how the government is doing today relative to that data point? And what was their expectation if shared, right? Complaints are typically, I'm upset with the current value. And praise is typically talking current value. But what we want to be able to do is, for really good engagements, understand what was it that people were expecting. So access to cutting edge technology is believed to be limited at the moment, but we expect that to be extensive. And the most interesting part in the questions we ask and the way that we navigate the conversation is we're looking to understand who they believe the accountable party is. What does that mean? Who do they believe is the authoritative voice in the government that's responsible for these values? So it's almost like a satisfaction survey for this role, if it exists in your government, or the perception of what role is supposed to be responsible for these. That helps in a few ways. One is to redirect through marketing or campaigns who the authoritative voices are for the most important aspects of the state. But it's also allows you to understand, and I'll show you in a moment, when particular metrics or data points require multiple accountable parties or different divisions in the government to work together to make the change. So this is raw data at the moment. We don't really go much further in this demo on the modification of this data. And what I mean by that is that economic diversification was mentioned 29 times, but we didn't aggregate that with capitalization. So there's another 8 there, and there's some more elsewhere. But you can expect that when the survey is done, it's still actually live right now, we finalize and aggregate the data, and that pulls all of the mentions into a single bucket. Why does this help? If you know what people believe or have perceptions of in your populace or your stakeholders, what they believe is the current state and their expected state, you can generate a SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that are likely perceived by the most amount of people in your population. And then what the target SWOT would be based on what their expectations or perspectives are on what the government should be doing on those same metrics. So this is still all raw data, but this goes through all of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. What's really interesting is that if you know the data point and you know the current state versus target state, and you know the authoritative voice or voices relative to those metrics, and you've generated a SWOT analysis on what is the current or status quo and what is the target SWOT analysis, you can generate a very smart recommended strategy. We don't believe that AI should be generating your strategies, but it can very quickly give you a focus on what needs to happen, to what metrics, by when, to achieve a specific outcome that has been identified. And this is a cross-department effort, as you can see here. And the goal of this is to be able to get you to a point that is near impossible to do today. What is the most important things we need to work on or give perception that we are focused on in the language that resonates most with the people that see that as important. So I'm going to give you one more kind of deeper insight here. This is an example of a single engagement, so a single interview, the different responsible parties or accountable parties that were mentioned or inferred and the metrics that would align with them, right? So if I'm the human resources manager, job opportunities was really important, but we can see there was no current or expected. So the person brought up human resources, but never complained or gave a value of it. Since this was a short survey intended to be a demonstration within the space, we didn't extend the survey to go as long as people were willing to talk. We cut it off at about 5 minutes. So in practice, this would actually go in and try and see if the person would give any values. So we can see they were talking about moderate influence. I'm not going to show the actual question and answers that are applicable here, just from a privacy perspective, but the HR person could look at why was my role brought up, and she could dive into that and see what the questions were and the answers were that were relative to there. But if we know those metrics, we can also come up with what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in the current state from this perspective. What is the target state based on just this conversation and the data we have available? You can see that there's still threats anticipated, but it's a move from A to B, right? And when we look at the larger strategies, we can aggregate those together and go, there's other areas they're addressing competitive position, but in this case, we're seeing we want to move from this concept of what our weaknesses and threats are to this being our weaknesses and threats if we're addressing these strengths and opportunities. And then very specifically, what are the ways in which we could move from current to target? This is data that is best used for government and large enterprise and NGO strategy design. It is near impossible to get without a sophisticated system like IAXOV's Unifies platform. I hope that was helpful and look forward to more conversations. Thank you so much. Okay. Well, that was that. Hopefully that was easy enough to hear and follow along with.
Yeah, audio came through good on my end too.
Okay. Any questions? You can drop them in the chat, or Ross, if you have any questions on your end, you can bring them up as well.
Yeah, if anyone wants to unmute their microphone and ask a question there as well, while we're recording, feel free. As I'm curious, what are other industries or applications do you see this sort of AI being used with?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So one of the reasons we were at the Wave Tech Center with that application was to spark interest. What are the other applications for speech and sight integrated compute, really, right? And so we ended up with about 25 different use cases for how this can be used for engagement, just directly from the City of Calgary stakeholders and other enterprises that were at the Wave Tech Center. So that was great. Some of them, like I'd mentioned, one was, can we put a voice interface on top of the VR platform that's there? Another would be, say, with the GIS department, can we put a speech and sight interface on top of the GIS data that's stored at the city and help people access there? But one of our other reference applications is actually called Stratavita, and it is a talent management solution. And so if you think about the concept of a perfect interview, we're able to take an interview and assess someone's skill competency and the level, right? So depending on an industry, a role, the particular team that they would potentially be hiring into or that they're currently on and wanting to progress, we can assess the skills that are required for their career journey that they're on, and give them SWOT analysis, very similar to what we just saw there, but SWOT analysis on their current competency for the industry that they're in, the roles that they're interested in. We can give them a strategy on how to deal with that SWOT, as well as recommended situational experiences they could put themselves in within that company or even just on their own time. And then once somebody was to say do 5 or 6 skills that were required for a particular role, we generate a career investment report for their manager, which would say, over the next 12 months, to move Mary from where she is today to where she's wanting to go, we can say that these are the things that are available as resources for training or otherwise in the company or publicly. These are the artifacts that you'd want to be able to see Mary produce. Maybe these are some of the challenges you'd like to see her take on. And at the end of 12 months, right, 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, the AI would be checking in, doing 360 reviews if possible or if desired. And at the end of the 12 months, we'd be able to have a really good idea. Did Mary meet what she was expected to meet to be able to progress to the next level? But also, throughout that entire span of time, whatever it is, was Mary's manager aware of what she needed to do to engage and empower her, right? And so that's one of the other platforms that we've built out and we have employed currently at in the enterprise space. We're looking at doing that in the education space in the next 30 days, actually. But
Yeah,
there's anything that you can think of that you put a sight and speech interface in front of, it's revolutionary.
I'm thinking just with regards to the interview side of things, is there maybe you don't have this set up right now, but is there opportunity to have this be an interviewer that helps out a human interviewer? So a lot of jobs there will be multiple people interviewing a single candidate. Instead of it being 2 to 3 people interviewing a candidate, could you have that traditional interviewer working alongside and listening with the AI, kind of doing another level of oversight, but then the AI still providing that recommendations or even actively conducting the interview with the person?
Absolutely. Yeah. So we actually have 5 different, I guess 5 might be 6 now, 5 different interview types. So one is behavioral, right? Standard behavioral questions. Other is technical. So because we have the site capabilities and we can also do document and picture and all that kind of stuff recognition. Say it's very highly technical, like coding or even a UX design interview. You can go through a technical interview where you're submitting data or the camera's watching what you're doing and it's analyzing what you're completing. There is human to human plus AI. So the way our whole concept is that when when you start an engagement, so whether it's unifies like at City of Calgary or an interview at an enterprise for a role, based on the configuration, you click a button and it generates the universe in which that engagement's going to happen. What's really cool about that is that you can add in as many other people as you want. So it's like the similar technology of a Zoom room. So you could say, well, there's going to be, a candidate, there's, a human interviewer, plus there's an AI that is listening. But hey, there's also another AI whose camera is only visible to the hiring manager and it's showing them statistics and details about the candidate in real time, right, based on the interview, or popping up text that is telling that the interviewer what good questions are, or how to dig deeper based on a specific rubric maybe the company has. So, and there's a couple other different ways that we can go into the interviews as well, including take-home projects and otherwise.
Yeah, that's quite a comprehensive different route you can go down, especially being able to integrate live with multiple AIs, multiple people all being engaged.
Yeah.
I do have a comment in chat, which I think brings up a question. Person in chat says, thinking about medical research would be a good one, like with vaccine surveys. Have you done much research or look into the medical field for that sort of thing, where you could have conducted medical interviews with them to receive feedback, say for doctors or follow-up assessments? Because that's one thing that is quite a challenge in terms of capacity for doctors to be able to do.
Yeah, I think the concept is already there. We haven't done it in the medical space, but the way that our system's designed, even from the survey, is there's a rubric, right? And we have a perfect conversation rubric. And so I think that's a really interesting use case. But I think especially in research, because one of the things that fail in research is the ability to get really good feedback, right? And so you have these blind studies, you bring in the groups, it's basically a focus group. You hope that, by the end of the, third interview, going into the fourth interview, the interviewer isn't tired, bored, whatever the case may be, had bad toast for breakfast, right? So it's going to impact the stuff. So I think what we could do is bring in consistency to support those interviews at very least. And whether that's just human to AI or whether that's human and AI communicating, but with a human overlord kind of tweaking in real time, just watching that, right? There's a bunch of different ways you could do that, but that's a really, really interesting use case.
Are there any other use cases that you haven't touched on yet that you kind of envision would be good ones potentially to go after, or ones where there may not be the market yet, but maybe there's opportunities that are emerging?
Well, that last half of that sentence is, the entire world. Yeah. So the way that my vision is, what we're developing should not be relegated to a box. It should not be relegated to the box of a computer or a mobile device or a kiosk. In reality, what we're trying to build is if we have this platform where anything can plug in and out, bidirectional, voice, video, sensory, or otherwise, we are the operating system for engagement and it's within its environment. So an example might be, especially if we start looking at what we might be able to do in the early days with VR, can we flip it around and that it's IAXOV that's generating the experience, right? And so could it not be installed into an Optimus robot? Could it not be installed into a car? Could it not be installed into a civic environment that's in control of lights and otherwise? I mean, that's getting ridiculous, but I think that that's kind of where we're seeing at least our vision pulling us is how do we make that this is something that can be deployed and utilizing whatever's available in an environment to make the perfect experience on a person by person basis. So hyper personalized engagement.
That sounds like there's a lot of potential, like over and above what existing AIs are doing, or like the old-fashioned AI assistants that we've had in phones for a number of years. You're really creating that next level of that platform. I'm thinking back to the medical question, actually,
Mm.
just with what you're explaining there. I don't know if you're a fan of it, but I'm thinking in sci-fi, like Star Trek and Voyager, they have a medical assistant who's
Right.
basically like an AI assistant who has all that medical knowledge in the database and is able to provide that medical conversation as well as those recommendations and those sort of updates. And it doesn't necessarily have to be within the medical sphere, but can you take that specified data set and that interview rubric and really build a customized AI that has that knowledge base that can then really deliver it with context to that user's feedback? And what sort of volume of specification could it work under those conditions for what your understanding is right now? So, for example, maybe a certain specific medical piece it could do, but could it do something more broad scale that like a general practitioner might be able to do for recommendations? Because I'm thinking about people who go online and they just search Google to try and figure out what the answer is to their
Yeah,
medical
yeah,
thing,
yeah, yeah.
and they immediately in their mind go to the earliest extreme. Maybe this
Yeah,
could
I'm
be
dying.
that like buffer in
Yeah,
between
yeah,
where it's like, here's the actual statistics and we
yeah.
don't want to recommend it, but that way when people go to their doctor, they're not already at the extreme.
Absolutely. So here's the really interesting part. When you're using IOXOV to interview, we call it interview, but it's really an engagement, right?
Mm-hmm.
The reality is that it's using all the data that's available to it in real time, and everything is an input. So context can have another AI agent spawn in real time to go solve a problem and bring that back, or participate in the conversation, right? So don't think of it as IOXIV talks with the person or is listening to a patient on a bed, but rather IOXIV is aware of the situation and the requester demands upon itself, and it can present back to the appropriate people if that's guarded or just generally. So I'll give you an example in 911, right? And this is probably I think it's really demonstrative of the exact example you gave right there. And you know that I had a recent 911 call and, I didn't know the cross street in which the perpetrator was heading towards. And so I was of no use to the 911 operator. Um, and that could have resulted in something much worse than nothing happening. However, one thing it could have been doing, if IAXOV was listening to the call, could have generated a second screen experience for um, that dispatcher to be able to hear, and we've done the testing already for this specifically with 911, is listening to the person. What are they saying relative to the 911 rubric? Like, what do I need to know as a 911 operator? I need to know where they are. Are they safe? And where is the event moving towards, if it is moving, right? And then a human has to figure out all the anomalies in the way the person's explaining it, right? And trying to figure that stuff out. What we did is we ran 911, a fake version of our 911, listening to what I had to say. I was just regenerating the call, and it was instantly able to know that 28th Street was the cross street, right? So if it's in a medical situation, that of all the sensors that are going on in a particular room, say you're in the emerge, it's got your blood pressure, it's got your pulse, it's got, it's connected to your EKG, maybe it's got access to your watch, your Apple Watch, whatever the case may be. It's hearing what the doctor's saying. It knows the doctor's tried some tests, that kind of concept. It sees the wincing in your eyes when you move a leg, whatever, right? All these different types of things, that it can say, based on all of this, this is something that's likely. Or, trained to be that assistant in that medical room, saying, these are the things that we need to know. This is the reduction in time or the increase in efficacy we need for doctors or nurses, right? And so it's really tuned to that. So I think it's definitely a use case I would love to try. I think it's something that we already have the environment set up to be able to play around with. It would just have to be an environment to go and execute. Oh, you're on mute, or I can't hear you. No,
Yeah,
you're on mute.
sorry, I did mute the
Gotcha.
birds. How detailed a or large of a data set would you need to be able to do that? And would it, I guess, how would you set up a data set to feed it? Because one of the challenges I see with a lot of different AI systems that are being developed is you need to feed them very specifically how the data sets are set up to be able to get the desired output. With your system, how tuned do those data sets need to be for its training? Could it just be straight medical journals and books, or does it need to be like broken down into more specific data sets that are designed to be fed to the AI?
So that's a great question. I think the answer is right here. I have a hot clue, but what I would tell you is you have to know what you're trying to improve first, right? So for my example with the 911, I knew that I needed to improve time to understanding if the event is moving, where is it and where is it moving towards, and express that as a cross street, right? So I was able to tune that just because of my experience, my lived experience, right? But if I was on the dispatch team or at a PSAP, public safety access point, right, that answers the 911 calls, my training would have already told me the first thing I need to know, and the only thing I need to know is if it's moving, what's the cross street it's moving towards, right? So that told me that the efficacy that I could help as an AI would be in knowing that. So I'm assuming, and somebody had mentioned, I think the flat effect there, right, is whatever information we have, if the AI is attuned to say, this is the efficacy you want to improve for better outcomes, right? This is the most important thing that saves the most amount of lives. Focus on this. It would be looking for anything that would be relative to that, and then say it was a flat effect, which I believe to mean that there's no indication, right, or no visual indication. Maybe other sensory details could, and that it gives a priority given the situation. It's an emergency, right? Whatever the person's history, medical history, whatever the case may be. This is the priority tree in which to go check. Try this to see if it's this. Try this to see if it's this. Prove that it's not this, right? Those kinds of concepts. So I think you could very, I wouldn't say easily, you could very straightforward say, this is the things I want to target. This is the standard training for that. And this is the information that's available, and run some tests, run, a few hundred tests to find out. And recorded information is fine too, right? If there's recordings of this or simulations of this, or maybe what's happening in medical schools and training has access to this that you could run it, not in critical situations, I think you definitely determine at what point does the AI present efficacy options any amount of time faster, right? The second that you're equal or faster to a nurse or a doctor coming up with that diagnosis that drove to efficacy in whatever their duty was, from there everything's positive, right? You've now hit the first, the mean, the first standard deviation. Everything is positive from there. That becomes the baseline. Oh, you're on mute again.
Yeah, that's interesting to see the details in there. I'm also thinking about what's the other side of things where perhaps you're somebody that's wanting to improve your communication and your interviewing skills,
Yeah.
or you are applying for a job in a specific department or piece, and you want to make sure that you as a human are presenting appropriately to either an AI or a human or an interview, or working on your own skills. Is there that side that you could build into the platform for personal skill development? I know you're looking into the education, but I'm also thinking a few areas kind of outside education where you might want to program your own AI or go after specific pieces to train yourself as a person as an output versus just feeding into the AI system.
100%. And that's actually where we started. So how do I prepare for a job interview? And our old prototype, I think, is still up. It's embarrassing, which is great. If you're not embarrassed by what you ship first, then. But if you go to preview.ioxov.com, you can go in and try 140 different skills on product management, urban design, Amazon, Facebook. And then in there, we also have, so you can go test yourself on those skill sets, get a SWOT analysis, boom, done. If it doesn't work and it crashes, it's because it's our prototype system. But what's also in there, which we invite some people to sometimes, is that you can go through and interview the AI, right? So there's a case where we were talking with Alberta Innovates, and they said, that's a really interesting technology. We don't have a need for it. If it was something that maybe could have entrepreneurs training or practicing communicating with the market, right? So their ideal customer profile and getting used to that conversation, that might be interesting. So we actually have that where you can go in and pick any one of the skills that you're wanting to. If you go into a preview, you'll see you set the industry, the role level, all these different types of things. Well, in this, instead of picking a skill, you say, well, here's the ideal customer profile that I'm talking to, and then that person is in the conversation with you. And so you can ask some questions. And what ends up coming out of that is a jobs to be done report. And that jobs to be done report helps you understand, did you drive a good conversation? And it actually is kind of the reverse of our rubric by basically demonstrating to you, well, there was no functional metrics, there was no quantitative, no qualitative metrics, no emotional factors that were captured in the call because you didn't tease them out, right? And so it actually teaches you how to do that. And lastly, on all of the interviews that we do for, say, jobs or education or whatever you have, the transcripts are available after the call. And what those transcripts show you is why you were being asked those specific questions. And why that's important is because we never get feedback after interviews. Even if we do, it's never going to be as truthful as we would love it to be. But what our transcripts do is they actually demonstrate how our AI works, is that we actually figure out the intent of what's needed to be said and then figure out what to be said. And by doing that, when you look at the transcripts, you'll see, well, why did they ask that question? Wasn't I clear about that? Well, the next question, the following question, the reason behind the question being asked will let you know that's a natural follow-up question. So if I'm thinking about executive presence, I'm teeing up the end of one sentence because I know what the next sentence is going to be, right? Or, hey, I had a really long-winded answer there and I still wasn't clear. So what can I go back and you can find out how you can be better at answering. So yeah, the whole thing is actually about self-improvement at the end of the day. And I think that's why no one has ever pushed back yet any of our prospects or clients of the idea of someone receiving that feedback directly from our system after an interview, right? Because that person can take that and it's transferable. They can walk away with that right now, right? And we found that, like, say this enterprise that's using this right now for hiring, they when when they see people applying for jobs, they have six different skills that person needs to apply for the role. They put a breaking the ice one first. What would you do if you had a leaky faucet? And people start there, and then they get the feedback report afterwards. And what it does, it's a psychological hit, right? To go, oh, I'm going to get this data. I'm going to go be very engaged and very truthful in my answers, because even if I don't get hired by this company, I want to walk away with the best report that's actually going to reflect me. And so what you end up with is you get better interviewing even just by people being engaged in the platform. So at the end of the day, short answer of that really long-winded question was, yeah, we want to build people, right? This whole purpose of all of AI, I think, is to build people.
That's really good because that's one area with interviews that I know a lot of people are challenged with because it's rare if you ever get feedback. Like I remember years ago when I was doing relentless job hunting, I think I applied for hundreds of jobs, had a whole bunch of different interviews, and I only got two times where I went in for interview feedback. And one of them was just very basic. It was weeks later, they forgot what a lot of the details were, and one of the other ones was a more detailed and honest one, but it lacked a lot of that nuance that was kind of involved with it.
Yeah.
We've been talking a lot about the different applications. What's the versatility like for the platform, for example, for multiple languages? How many different sorts of languages have you done and tested on? Uh, and has it worked well in those situations?
So far, about 20 languages, various versions of Indian languages. We do notice that, so India has, somebody's told me 32, somebody's told me 20 different official languages. But what it'll do is typically draw back towards Hindi. And so we do need to tune that a little bit better, right? So somebody will start at one language and then it draws over. It's good with, various versions of Chinese. One person actually at the city of Calgary there tested it by speaking Hindi and English in the same sentence, right? Like Franglish, right? And it was able to absolutely understand them right away, which is great. Our system normalizes to the language of the client. So if it was a French system, then no matter what the person spoke in the back end, all the system would output French, but communicate in their language. But we have noticed some challenges in languages in Africa, and Nigeria is a really growing opportunity environment for us at the moment. One of our team members is from there, and a lot of the engagement we have from there is all on the innovation side and at the government level. But no system out there is really good with Nigerian language, or they have a local language that's kind of like broken English, kind of like Jamaican, right? Has patois. Um, and then the other one I would like to see a lot more efficacy on is native languages in North America. And so general large languages, the top 20 languages in the world, not a problem. Not a problem at all. For the other 200, we're not there yet. So
Is a lot of that from a lack of training data and use of those languages inside of those language models?
I think it's two things, right? And I think it comes back down to, if you think about the value that the Wave Tech Center has in opening up the supply chain for private industry to try on smaller scale things. I think that's the same sort of thing. So I used to work at Nuance, right? Nuance Communications, which most people don't know is like the speech recognition company in the world. They own almost all the patents. And so I worked there for quite a long time. And one of our challenges from a cost perspective in introducing additional languages wasn't simply that there wasn't training data available. We can go get it, right? There's plenty of Nigerian and, patois or Native American language sources to get. It's actually the demand. And I think that's where government has, if we're looking to see what is AI going to be for citizens? I think government has the opportunity to start to say, well, how do we make sure that all of our citizens are addressed, and opening up those opportunities for that training to happen? And I think it should be open source. Right? I think all that training should be completely open source, so that anyone, whether it's an open AI or it's you and I, we're able to use that to just better the relationship between AI and humans.
I'm thinking too, I don't know if this applies to your product necessarily, but I was at one of the indigenous conferences for technology, and one of the things they talked about is their languages are near dying. There's only a few people left who really know how to speak and use those languages. Um, but they still want to be able to preserve that for the culture and preserve what that means in the interactivity. Do you see a way for them to be able to train and build that into an AI, or is it just so difficult because there is such a few number of people who really fluently understand those languages to really translate it into an AI conversational system?
Well, I think good is better than perfect. And what I mean by that is, if there's certain people that know certain amounts of a language. So here's an example. What we would do at Nuance, we did Dragon Naturally Speaking was Nuance as well, right? Is you would, I don't know if people know this, but when your speech recognition wasn't at a certain threshold of confidence level, a human reviewed it. Right. And then there was always the reinforcement learning. Yes, that was this is that, right? So there's, and we found out, right, like if you have a TV in your home that has speech rec on it, we found out Samsung and others. Sorry, I don't know if it was Samsung. I shouldn't bring up brand names, but there was some brands that would just constantly listen to homes. And I'm not sure if some of those little speakers you have your home that were doing that as well, in the uh, uh, for the intent of listening to see if they missed the cue, right? But what I think might be a good advantage of taking those existing systems that are in place is, if they're speaking a specific language, and we could possibly use IAXOV to help a native group get their language in, right? So it's actually a rubric to say, go through as much conversation, starting with standard conversations, right? You can use Pimsleur's approach of learning a new language, and just go through and say, let's learn all the words and how to say them, the general ones for general conversation, and then have the AI go back and forth on communication and go, I don't know what this word is. What would be the word for this, right? And being able to have a Rosetta Stone type of conversation so that it can learn, and then put it into situations, friendly situations, where people are maybe like, those olden days where we could all hook our computer up to the internet and share off time, right? Is that people around the world doing research or volunteering for research could come in that know that language or want to learn that language, to try and learn and try and communicate with it, and then it propagate back to the experts when confidence levels are low. So what would be the word? Did I say this correctly? Right? I think you could revive those, but you need to have all of um, the ingress, the processing, the feedback loop, and then just the sample size to drive that up. But I don't think that would be very difficult. It's just, I don't think it would be hard to do. It would just be difficult to get that many people to participate.
Okay, very cool. Nice to hear that there's some potential there for us
Yeah,
to be able to save those languages and potentially even just expand our understanding of human language to begin with, because it's already so varied with different
exactly.
forms of communication. One of the areas I'm thinking of, I don't know if it necessarily applies to your platform, is with sign language, because it's purely a visual language. It doesn't have a written form to it. Could something like that be integrated into an AI for conversational? I've seen AIs that will just hear and it'll turn the text into the sign language, but I haven't seen anything yet where a person is speaking sign language and then interacting and talking with an AI that's signing back to them.
I will let you see our prototypes. So that's what we are. So one of the groups that we're working with for our entire platform is Canadian National Institute for the Blind. And so Craig Peterson and his team on the Alberta Northwest Territory side. And what we're looking to do is everything that you've seen from IAXOV is to be entirely designed to support anyone that is partially or fully blind and or deaf. And the deaf part will come afterwards, but we already have prototypes running where the exact same experience you saw at the WaveTech Center or that you've seen before with the enterprise and for jobs and all that kind of stuff, you can do sign language.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Right. I don't see any more questions in the chat there, and I know we're kind of coming up at the top of the hour since we got started there.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you'd like to close out with or say to the group and online for the recording?
Yeah, I think one of the neat things, so I've in one of my presentations in the past, I've shown how humanity replatforms itself every once in a while. And so we'll call them industrial revolutions or whatever the case may be. But we replatformed in 1908 to 1913 when Henry Ford brought cars from, there was 500 independent automakers into mass production. And in that 5 years, New York went from one car on a street full of horses and buggies to the street full of one horse and buggy full of cars. And the world replatformed, right? And that had a whole bunch of other things that went along with it, right? Such as roads and signs and all that kind of stuff that happened. But it was really the tipping point was be able to get enough into people's hands in a standardized format that, was efficacious on delivery and, accountability in transportation. Being able to do that replatformed. But Steve Jobs, I believe that when he went to Xerox PARC and saw the graphical user interface in the mouse device, that was his tipping point, and every single thing that he's built from that point forward was based on that. And if you listen to the documentary from the people at Xerox PARC, they are so frustrated that the executives at Xerox didn't see it and just gave it to Steve Jobs. But that was replatforming us into computing, personal computing. Because the computers were already small enough, small enough, right? Computers were already small enough, they were already cheap enough, and they were already powerful enough to be in a home. But they weren't being adopted at mass scale until a graphical user interface. Who created Netscape? Andreessen. So in his conversations, and if you look at what Microsoft's comments have been about Netscape as well, is that it took them a while. Microsoft was obviously late coming to the board for the browser, but the world replatformed onto the internet because of the browser, nothing else. And what Microsoft realized is that the browser, and just like, I had a full screen view on my share. And if you full screen a browser without the search bar, it's identical to a software application. And what they realized is that a browser could actually replace the entirety of Microsoft's business. And that's why they got into the browser game. And I think if we think about everything that has been going on with the graphical user interface and the touch, browser, whatever the case may be, it's all been about humans communicating something to the computer to get something out, right? And what that takes is really good designers and engineers to come up with these amazing experiences that make people engage, touch and talk and whatever the case may be with an interface for a process to run to spit something back out. But it's not bidirectional. And I think with speech and sight integrated computing, what we're actually seeing is bidirectional. In theory, you should be able to show up at IAX's webpage and it just be a floating orb, right? And that it then has a conversation with you. Any way you want to have that conversation, right? Like click a button, or what do you want to see? What do you want to know? Or hey, I noticed you came here from that search. Look at this, right? And be able to ask you questions and create the program and the processing on the fly to deliver what you're asking for. So I think the world is about to replatform into a bidirectional communication or engagement with computers like we've never seen before. The same way the browser can replace computing or all of Microsoft's business. I think that we're going to see speech and sight integrated computing. I don't say AI, I think that's a tool underneath. I think because of speech and sight integrated computing and sensory and whatever comes with that, the whole world's going to re-platform away from these physical boxes we're stuck into to our environment being like the holodecks or even the Star Trek ship.
Do you think that would then move us away from more traditional computing, or would it just be another layer in what we're already doing as we've kind of already moved into having some of these basic AI assistants? Is it just more of that like hyper integration with other pieces that are going on, or do you see us moving into more of that pure conversational piece again?
Pure conversational. Like if you think about what the data center was just announced in Alberta, right? And you look at what the AI data center that was announced, or what Elon Musk is building, and then the next iteration on top of that's another
Hmm.
100,000 GPUs. That's a real-time brain that he's building, right? And he's already posting on X that you can ask it about current events. It'll give you an accurate response because what he's testing is that conversational interface. I think I in the way that Andreessen could imagine what the internet could be back then, I think is where we are right now. And my imagination is how much do we hate that we're stuck in boxes? Like every single one of us at some point during our day complains about the Zoom interface, or having to go get this data, or the way that it's stored. And it's all because a whole bunch of humans had their hands in, this is how we stored the data here. This is the API for this. What's the API? What's the contract on how to communicate with that platform between this platform? Okay, well, that's how somebody else plugged those two pieces in together, right? And we look at I'll say their name, an SAP platform, and it might be great for the executive side, but every single human hates working with anything with SAP. And just poking a bear there. But the point is, I think if you move to the next layer that says, give me the data, right? Like the CEO of Salesforce was saying today, show me something different than what already is in Salesforce and Slack and whatever the case may be from a data perspective. If you have a new way of storing data, because we still use hard drives, where everyone still uses hard drives. Show me a new way to store data. I think we're going to get there. We're going to go to a vector database, and we're going to have transformers on front of that that's saying, what do you want me to do with the data? Let me go find out if you have authority to access that data. Hey, you do. By the way, maybe you didn't know. If you were to ask me this way, this is all the data you actually have access to, because I understand what you're trying to do, but you don't even know how to ask me the right questions. So I think within like 10 years, because of the speed in which we're innovating, we're going to see an entire new environment on what it means to have hyper-personalized compute.
How do you foresee that? Because I've thought about this with AI in general. How do you foresee that affecting younger generations and people who are starting to conversationally talk with AI from a very young age, so that at their core, they're learning language and interaction almost more than with the computer than they are with other people. We talked about it improving interview skills, but
Yeah.
how does it possibly affect at even younger age levels in your mind?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think if, we take this journey, this leap in thinking, my God willing, we would actually get out of the house. We would go back out into the street. We would be in the forest more, right? So my family and I, for the last few weekends of the summer, we were out getting firewood, right? So we'd drive out back in the truck into the woods, cut down some trees, light a fire, have some hot dogs, and then come home and that kind of stuff. We took our guns and we did some plinking and that kind of stuff and what have you. And what would have made that experience better? Not much. My kids were learning how to use a flint, right? But maybe if they brought up a video, or maybe their eyeglass was like, oh, so the reason what you want to do with that flint is hold it a little better, right? So in other words, what have I always wanted as a dad for my kids is that they grow up with the skills of an Eagle Scout. Well, I'm not an Eagle Scout, and I never even went to Boy Scouts, right? But I would love to have been able to take my kids out into the forest and say, on the north side of a tree is where you're going to find the moss. So if you're lost, all these different types of things. Well, why don't we have that? Well, the reason we haven't had that is because I had to physically take my phone out to the woods, which has horrible coverage as it is, right? Or my computer, or I had to watch a YouTube video, or that content isn't even available. So I think as we start to move away from being attached to these physical devices, I want to shake my computer as I'm talking um, to these physical devices, we'll actually move back out into the world with enhanced experience, right? And so as we're trying to understand how to do things, almost, I don't want to get into the whole matrix where, plug in a tape and understand how to fly a helicopter, but what can we learn on YouTube today by watching it? And what did we learn as a blacksmith's son 100 years ago? It was all through lived experience. So can we match that lived experience like that is on YouTube? And so I think there'll be content creators and all that kind of stuff will still happen. There'll still be, humans being fed into AI that then propagates out to the right humans at the right time for their, efficacy to actually drive efficiencies and effectiveness in whatever they're trying to do.
Yeah, I really like that vision because that's going back to kind of the core human experience of how we were designed to interact with one
Right.
another. Like I
Yeah.
think back to even before the written word was a thing, socialization was how we as a species interacted or how
That's right.
other species interacted through that social interaction. We created text and writing and all of these other pieces, which have now spawned into the systems that we're making here. And now we're trying to kind of go back in the other direction to bring us back to that essential core way of being of how we at our core are meant to be without
Exactly.
all of these extremities and add-ons that are now extra taxing our feeble primate brains on a day-to-day basis. Cool. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing your work with IAXOV and your vision there. It's really great to see that positive-minded focus looking toward the future there.
Thank you very much.
Um, yeah, and thank you very much to everybody who was able to make it out here in person, and thank you to all who are catching us on the recording here. And for those who are online, hope you have a wonderful night. And for those of you who are catching the recording, I hope you have a great rest of your day for whatever day it is.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.